The desperate wailing of her child pierced the cool morning air as Florence Caldwell clutched little Timothy to her chest, pounding frantically on the doctor's door for the third time that week. Her knuckles were raw and bleeding, but her determination never wavered, even as the doctor's harsh words echoed in her mind. "I don't treat the children of women like you." Florence's eyes stung with tears as she cradled her 4-year-old son, whose normally rosy cheeks were now pale and feverish. The smallpox outbreak that had ravaged their small town of Rivercross, Wyoming territory in 1876 had already claimed 12 lives, and Florence was terrified Timothy would be next. "Please," she begged, her voice breaking as she hammered on Dr. Palmer's door once more. "He's burning up. I can pay." The door swung open violently and Dr. Palmer stood there, his gray mustache twitching with annoyance. His eyes, cold as the winter sky, flicked from Florence to the child in her arms. "Mrs. Caldwell, I've told you before. I won't waste medicine on a child whose father I don't know. This town has respectable families who need my services." His voice dripped with contempt as he looked at her worn calico dress. "A woman who arrives in town with a child and no husband has made her choices." "But he's just a child," Florence protested, tears streaming down her face. "My husband died in the war. I've shown you the letters anyone could have written," Dr. Palmer scoffed, beginning to close the door. "Now take your bastard and leave decent folk in peace." A shadow fell across them both as a tall figure stepped onto the porch. "That's enough," came a deep, steady voice. Florence turned to see Isaiah Murphy, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the morning sun. The cowboy's usually easygoing expression was replaced by something harder as he stared at the doctor. "This child needs help," Isaiah continued, his hand resting casually on his holster. "And you took an oath to provide it, Palmer." Dr. Palmer's face reddened. "Don't tell me how to run my practice, Murphy. This isn't your concern." Isaiah stepped closer, his spurs clinking softly against the wooden porch. "A sick child is everyone's concern." He glanced at Florence, his expression softening momentarily before hardening again as he turned back to the doctor. "Now, are you going to treat this boy, or do I need to have a word with the town council about your selective care?" "The town council knows my policy on moral standards," Dr. Palmer sneered. "Unlike some, I don't consort with women of questionable virtue." Florence flinched as if she'd been struck. 2 years in Rivercross, working honest days at the laundry, attending church every Sunday, and still the whispers followed her. A widow with a child, no family to vouch for her story. It was enough to brand her in this small town. Isaiah's eyes narrowed dangerously. "The only person with questionable virtue here is the man refusing to help a sick child." His voice was low, but carried the unmistakable edge of a threat. The doctor's face contorted with rage. "Get off my property, Murphy, both of you, before I call the sheriff." Isaiah looked at Florence and the trembling child in her arms. Timothy's breathing had grown more labored, his small body radiating heat like a furnace. "Hold on, madam," Isaiah said, his voice gentler now. "I'll ride till I find a doctor who will help." "There isn't time," Florence whispered, desperation making her voice shake. "The nearest town is Clearwater, 30 miles south. Then I'll ride like the devil himself is chasing me." Isaiah touched Timothy's forehead gently. "How long has he been this way?" "The fever started 2 days ago. The rash appeared yesterday." Florence pulled back the blanket to reveal angry red spots beginning to form on the child's arms. Isaiah's jaw tightened. "I know someone, an old medicine woman who lives in the hills, saved my life once when I took a bullet. She might be our only hope, doctor." Palmer laughed derisively. "You'd trust your child to an Indian witch doctor over a trained physician. Over you. Without hesitation, Isaiah replied coldly. He turned to Florence. Mrs. Caldwell, I know we've only spoken in passing, but I'm asking you to trust me. Let me take you both to her. Florence looked up at the tall cowboy. She'd seen him around town, tipping his hat politely when they passed on the street. He had a reputation for being fair and honest, even if he kept mostly to himself. With Timothy growing weaker by the minute, what choice did she have? Yes, she said finally. Please, Mr. Murphy. Isaiah nodded. My horse is at the hitching post. I'll help you up. As they turned to leave, Dr. Palmer called after them. Don't bring that child back to town if he survives. We don't need Savage's remedies contaminating our community. Isaiah's hand tightened on Florence's elbow, guiding her away. Don't listen to him. Come on. His horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding, waited patiently at the post. Isaiah mounted first, then reached down for Timothy, cradling the boy carefully against his chest before helping Florence up behind him. Hold on tight, he instructed as she wrapped her arms around his waist, her son secured between them. With a flick of the reins, they were galloping out of town, leaving a cloud of dust and whispers in their wake. Florence pressed her cheek against Isaiah's back, praying she hadn't just made a terrible mistake. The rhythm of the horse beneath them and the solid warmth of the cowboy in front of her were the only constants in a world that had suddenly turned upside down. They rode hard for nearly 2 hours, the landscape changing from rolling grasslands to scrubby foothills. Timothy drifted in and out of consciousness, whimpering occasionally. Each sound tore at Florence's heart. Not much farther, Isaiah called over his shoulder as they entered a narrow canyon. She lives alone up here, name's Naomi. She was a healer for her people before the reservation. The trail grew steeper, forcing them to slow to a walk. Shadows lengthened as the afternoon waned. Finally, they rounded a bend and came upon a small cabin nestled against the canyon wall, smoke curling from its chimney. Isaiah dismounted smoothly, still holding Timothy, then helped Florence down. Her legs trembled from the long ride and fear for her son. Before they could reach the door, it swung open. An elderly woman with deeply lined copper skin and silver hair pulled back in a long braid stood watching them. Her dark eyes missed nothing as they traveled from Isaiah to Florence to the child. Naomi, Isaiah said respectfully, inclining his head. This boy needs your help. The doctor in town refused him. The old woman's gaze sharpened. Bring him inside. Her English was clear but accented. Quickly now. The interior of the cabin was warm and smelled of herbs and smoke. Bundles of dried plants hung from the rafters, and shelves lined with jars of various contents covered one wall. Lay him here, Naomi instructed, pointing to a small cot near the fireplace. As Isaiah gently placed Timothy down, she placed a weathered hand on the boy's forehead. The spotted sickness, she murmured. It has taken many. Fear clutched at Florence's throat. Can you help him? Please, I'll give anything. Naomi's expression remained impassive, but her eyes softened. I will try. The fever must come down first. She turned to Isaiah. Fetch water from the spring behind the cabin. The bucket is outside. As Isaiah hurried to comply, Naomi began removing pouches from a wooden chest. How long has he been ill? She asked Florence. The fever started 2 days ago. The spots appeared yesterday. Florence hovered anxiously as the healer examined her son. He is strong, Naomi said, feeling Timothy's pulse. That is good. Now we must be stronger. What followed was a blur of activity. Isaiah returned with water, which Naomi mixed with herbs to make a bitter-smelling tea. She instructed Florence to help her remove Timothy's clothes and bathe his burning skin with cool water infused with more herbs. The boy cried weakly at first, then fell into an uneasy sleep. As night fell, Naomi prepared a poultice of crushed plants and spread it over Timothy's chest and the rash that was spreading across his torso. "Now we wait," she said, straightening with a slight grimace. "The night will tell us if he fights or surrenders." Isaiah, who had been silently assisting whenever needed, stepped forward. "Mrs. Caldwell needs rest too." Florence shook her head. "I can't leave him." "You will be no help to your son if you collapse," Naomi said firmly. "There is food in the pot. Eat, then rest. The chair by the bed will serve." Too exhausted to argue, Florence allowed Isaiah to lead her to the small table where he served her a bowl of stew. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten, and despite her worry, hunger won out. "Why did you help us?" she asked quietly as Isaiah sat across from her with his own bowl. "You hardly know me." He considered her question, his green eyes thoughtful in the firelight. "My ma taught me that how folks treat those who can't help themselves shows their true character. What that doctor did wasn't right. But to ride all this way for strangers." Isaiah set down his spoon. "Mrs. Caldwell, Florence," she interrupted. "Please." A small smile tugged at his lips. "Florence, then, truth is I've noticed you around town, how hard you work, how you keep your head high despite the gossip. That takes courage." He glanced over at Timothy. "And that boy of yours has the same look in his eye, determined like his ma." Florence felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. It had been a long time since anyone had spoken to her with such simple respect. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not many in Rivercross would have done what you did today. Then maybe Rivercross needs to do better." Isaiah's voice was gentle but firm. Their conversation was interrupted by Naomi. "The child is calling for you," she said to Florence. Florence rushed to Timothy's side. His eyes were open, glazed with fever but seeking hers. "Mama," he whispered. "I'm here, sweetheart." She took his small hand in hers. "Mama's right here. It hurts. I know, baby, but this nice lady is helping you get better." She stroked his damp hair back from his forehead, alarmed at how hot it still was. Naomi appeared at her side with another cup of the bitter tea. He must drink, all of it. Florence helped lift Timothy's head as Naomi carefully administered the medicine, spoonful by spoonful. The boy grimaced but swallowed obediently. "Good boy," Florence murmured, her heart swelling with love and fear. "Now sleep," Naomi said, placing a cool cloth on Timothy's forehead. "Both of you." Florence settled into the chair beside the cot, refusing to leave her son's side. As the night deepened, she drifted in and out of consciousness, startling awake each time Timothy stirred or made a sound. During one such moment, she realized someone had placed a blanket around her shoulders. Looking up, she saw Isaiah sitting across the room, his back against the wall, hat tipped forward but eyes alert, keeping watch. Their gazes met in the dim light of the dying fire. No words were needed. In that moment, Florence felt something she hadn't experienced in a very long time, the comfort of not being completely alone. The night crawled by with agonizing slowness. Timothy's fever rose and fell like the tide, sometimes burning so hot that Florence feared he would be consumed by it. During the worst hours, both Naomi and Isaiah helped bathe the child with cool water, speaking soft words of encouragement. Near dawn, Timothy's fever broke. Florence, half delirious with exhaustion herself, wept with relief as she felt his forehead cool under her palm. "The worst is past," Naomi announced, her lined face showing the first real smile Florence had seen. "But the battle is not yet won. The sickness must run its course." For 3 days they remained at the cabin. Timothy slowly improved, the angry rash fading, his appetite returning bit by bit. Florence never left his side except when absolutely necessary, sleeping in short bursts whenever her son did. Isaiah proved himself invaluable, hunting for fresh meat, fetching water, and even riding back to town once to collect some of Florence's and Timothy's belongings from their small rented room. "The town's talking," he reported when he returned. "Doctor Palmer's telling anyone who'll listen that you've endangered everyone by taking Timothy to savages." Florence's hands clenched in her lap. "What will we do when we return?" Isaiah sat beside her on the porch step, where they'd been watching the sunset while Timothy napped inside. "Do you want to return?" The question caught her off guard. "What do you mean?" He turned to face her fully, his expression earnest. "Florence, you deserve better than the way they treat you in Rivercross. You and Timothy both. Where would we go? I have no family, no money saved." The admission cost her pride, but it was the truth. "I have a small ranch about a day's ride from here. It's not much, just a cabin and a few hundred acres, some cattle, but it's mine, free and clear." His eyes held hers steadily. "There's a town nearby, New Hope. Smaller than Rivercross, but good people. They wouldn't judge you for being a widow." Florence's heart beat faster. "Mr. Murphy, Isaiah," he corrected with a small smile. "Isaiah," she amended, feeling strangely breathless. "Are you suggesting we come stay at your ranch?" "I'm suggesting you consider a fresh start." His hand moved as if to cover hers, then hesitated. "I know we haven't known each other long, but I'd like to help if you'll let me." Before she could respond, Naomi called from inside. Timothy was awake and asking for his mother. The conversation remained unfinished, but Florence found herself thinking about it as she helped her son eat a small bowl of broth. A fresh start. The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. On the fourth day, Naomi declared Timothy well enough to travel, though he would need continued care and rest. "The spotted sickness has marked him," she told Florence privately, "but he is strong. He will carry the scars, but not the weakness." Florence embraced the old woman, tears in her eyes. "How can I ever repay you?" Naomi's weathered hands patted her back. "Live well. That is payment enough." She glanced toward Isaiah, who was preparing the horse for their departure. "And perhaps listen to what that man has to say. His heart speaks truth, even when his words are few." The journey back was necessarily slower than their desperate ride to the cabin had been. Timothy, still weak but alert, sat in front of Isaiah while Florence rode behind, her arms encircling both of them. They stopped frequently to rest, and Isaiah pointed out landmarks and wildlife to Timothy, whose natural curiosity was returning with his health. As they made camp for the night, Florence found herself watching Isaiah with new eyes. The gentle way he lifted Timothy down from the horse. The patience with which he answered the boy's endless questions. The quiet competence as he built a small fire and prepared a simple meal. "Mama, can Mr. Murphy teach me to ride?" Timothy asked as they sat around the campfire, his small face animated in the dancing light. Florence smiled at her son's enthusiasm. "Perhaps someday when you're stronger." "I'd be honored," Isaiah said, his eyes meeting Florence's over Timothy's head, "if that's what you both want." There was a question in his gaze that made Florence's heart flutter. Before she could respond, Timothy yawned widely. "Time for sleep," Florence announced, helping her son settle into the bedroll Isaiah had prepared. The boy was asleep almost instantly. Exhausted from the day's journey, Florence sat back down by the fire, suddenly aware of being alone with Isaiah. The crackling flames filled the silence between them. "Thank you," she said finally, "for everything you've done for us." "Anyone would have done the same," he replied, poking the fire with a stick. "No," Florence shook her head. "They wouldn't. You know that as well as I do." Isaiah looked up at her, the firelight casting shadows across his features. "What will you do when we get back to Rivercross?" Florence took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about what you said, about a fresh start." And his voice was carefully neutral, but she could see hope flicker in his eyes. "I don't know if I can accept your offer," she admitted. "Not because I don't want to, but because I don't want to be a burden. Timothy and I have already imposed on your kindness too much." Isaiah set down the stick and moved to sit beside her. "Florence, listen to me. You and Timothy could never be a burden these past few days." He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I've come to care for you both more than I expected." Florence's pulse quickened. "We've only just met. Sometimes life doesn't give us the luxury of time." His hand found hers, warm and calloused. "I'm not asking for promises, just a chance for all of us." Florence looked over at her sleeping son, then back at Isaiah, whose honest face showed nothing but sincerity. She thought of returning to River Cross, to the whispers and judgment. Then she thought of a small ranch, a new town, and this man who had risked everything to help them when no one else would. "Yes," she said softly, "we'll come with you to New Hope." The smile that spread across Isaiah's face was like the sunrise, warm and full of promise. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips gently to hers. It was a kiss of beginnings, tentative yet hopeful. When they parted, Florence felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness, but from a joy she thought she might never feel again. "We should rest," Isaiah said, though he made no move to release her hand. "We've got a long ride tomorrow." They traveled for 2 days, heading west rather than returning to River Cross. Florence felt lighter with each mile that separated them from the town that had never truly accepted her. Timothy grew stronger daily, sitting up straighter in the saddle, pointing excitedly at hawks circling overhead or deer darting through the underbrush. On the afternoon of the second day, they crested a hill, and Isaiah reined in the horse. "There it is," he said, gesturing to the valley below. "Murphy Ranch," Florence gasped softly. The small cabin nestled in a grove of cottonwoods looked like something from a dream. A creek wound through the property, its banks green with spring growth. In the distance, cattle grazed peacefully on rolling grassland. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's home," Isaiah replied simply. "Or it can be, if you want it to be." They rode down into the valley as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. As they approached the cabin, Florence was struck by how well-maintained everything was. The corral beside the barn housed several horses that nickered in greeting as they approached. "You have quite an operation here," she remarked, impressed. Isaiah helped Timothy down first, then Florence. "I've been building it up for 5 years now. Started with just 10 head of cattle and this plot of land. And now, 200 head, and I bought the adjoining property last year." There was quiet pride in his voice. "It's enough to support a family comfortably." The word family hung in the air between them, full of possibility. Inside, the cabin was simple but welcoming. A large main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. 2 doors led off to what Florence assumed were bedrooms. "You and Timothy can take my room," Isaiah said, gesturing to the larger of the 2. "I'll bunk in the spare room for now." "For now?" Florence raised an eyebrow even as she blushed. Isaiah's eyes crinkled at the corners. "For as long as you need. No expectations, Florence, just possibilities." That night, after a meal of venison stew and cornbread that Isaiah prepared with surprising skill, they sat on the porch watching the stars appear one by one in the vast Wyoming sky. Timothy had fallen asleep in Florence's lap, worn out from the excitement of exploring his new surroundings. "We'll ride into New Hope tomorrow," Isaiah said quietly. "Get you both proper introduced to folks. There's a good doctor there, name of Harrison, known him for years. He'll want to check Timothy, make sure he's healing right. A doctor who won't turn us away." Florence couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. Isaiah's hand found hers in the darkness. "No one in New Hope will turn you away, not while I'm around. And how long will that be?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Isaiah turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "As long as you'll have me, Florence. I know it's fast. I know we're still learning about each other, but some things a man just knows deep down." "And what do you know, Isaiah Murphy?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I know that watching you with your son these past days has shown me what courage really looks like. I know that I haven't felt this way about anyone since before the war, and I'd given up thinking I ever would again." His fingers tightened around hers. "And I know that I want to build something here with you if you'll let me." Florence looked down at Timothy, sleeping peacefully against her, then at their intertwined hands, and finally up at Isaiah's face, open and honest in the silver light. "I think," she said slowly, "that I'd like that very much." Over the following weeks, Florence and Timothy settled into life at Murphy Ranch. True to Isaiah's word, the people of New Hope welcomed them warmly. Dr. Harrison confirmed that Timothy was recovering well, though he would indeed carry some scars from the pox. The town's schoolteacher, Mrs. Bennett, invited Timothy to join her small class once he was fully recuperated. Florence found purpose helping Isaiah with the ranch. Years of hard work had made her capable and strong, and she took pride in learning the rhythms of ranch life. In the evenings, she taught Isaiah to read better, discovering that while he had a keen mind for business and cattle, his formal education had been limited. Timothy flourished in the open spaces of the ranch. His strength returned fully, and soon he was following Isaiah everywhere, soaking up knowledge about horses, cattle, and the land like a sponge. The bond between them grew naturally, without force or pretense. As summer turned to fall, Isaiah took Florence aside one evening after Timothy was asleep. "I'd like to ride back to see Naomi," he said. "Bring her supplies for winter. Would you and Timothy come with me?" Florence agreed readily. She'd often thought of the old healer and wished to thank her again for saving her son's life. The journey back to the canyon was easier this time, filled with laughter rather than fear. When they arrived at the cabin, Naomi greeted them with a knowing smile. "I see you found your path," she said to Florence, her dark eyes twinkling as she looked between the three of them. While Timothy showed Naomi how well he had recovered, Isaiah took Florence's hand and led her a short distance from the cabin to a spot overlooking the canyon. "I brought you here for a reason," he admitted, suddenly looking nervous. "Oh," Florence's heart began to race. Isaiah took both her hands in his. "Florence Caldwell, these past months have been the happiest of my life. You and Timothy have brought something to my home that I didn't even know was missing." He swallowed hard. "I love you both, and I'd be honored if you'd consider becoming my wife." Joy, pure and overwhelming, flooded through Florence. "Are you certain? You've taken on so much with us." "I've never been more certain of anything," Isaiah interrupted, his green eyes intense. "You're not a burden, Florence. You're a gift, you and Timothy both." Tears spilled down Florence's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you, Isaiah Murphy." Their kiss was deeper this time, filled with promise and passion that had grown steadily over their months together. When they finally parted, both breathless, Isaiah rested his forehead against hers. "Should we tell Timothy?" he asked. Florence smiled. "I think he already knows. He asked me last week if he could start calling you Pa." Isaiah's eyes widened, then filled with emotion. "What did you tell him?" "I told him he should ask you himself. He's been working up the courage." They were married in New Hope's small church that December, with Timothy standing proudly beside them. Naomi made the journey from her canyon to attend, bringing with her a blanket she had woven herself as a gift. "For the new family," she said, presenting it to them. "May it keep you warm through all seasons." As they stood on the church steps after the ceremony, snow beginning to fall gently around them, Isaiah looked at Florence with wonder. "If you had told me a year ago that refusing to let a doctor turn away a sick child would lead to all this," he said, gesturing to include Timothy, who was happily catching snowflakes on his tongue, "I'd never have believed it." Florence leaned into her new husband's embrace. "Sometimes the greatest journeys begin with a simple act of kindness. And sometimes," Isaiah added, bending to kiss her as the snow swirled around them, "they lead exactly where you're meant to be." The years that followed brought more children to the Murphy ranch, 2 daughters and another son. The ranch prospered, as did the town of New Hope. Timothy grew into a fine young man who eventually took over much of the ranch's management, allowing Isaiah and Florence to enjoy their later years in comfort. They never forgot Naomi, visiting her regularly until her peaceful passing many winters later. And they kept her teachings alive, ensuring that their children and grandchildren understood that true healing came not just from medicine, but from courage, compassion, and love. Through all the seasons of their lives together, Florence and Isaiah would sometimes look back on that desperate day when he had promised to ride until he found help for her child. What had begun as one man's refusal to accept injustice had blossomed into a love that sustained them through hardships and joys alike, proving that even in the wildest parts of the West, the most powerful medicine of all was a heart brave enough to care.